Hi, grade 7. In this presentation today, we are going to revise together the modal verbs and their uses. Of course, you have been studying them for a few weeks now, and you surely understand a lot of them. But I thought that this presentation will help you revise them to understand them better. Let's start. If you remember, we said that modal verbs are can, could, may, might, shall, should, must, have to, will, would, had better, ought to, need, and so on. And as you have read in the tables in your roundup, each modal verb may have more than one function or more than one role in a sentence. For example, some modal verbs can be used for ability, permission, request, advice, necessity, expectation, possibility, conclusions, or we call it logical assumption. And we talk about in this presentation also how we use would in many cases. Now, what is the purpose of modal verbs, if you ask me this question? Well, most modal verbs are always followed by the base form of the verb. It means the main verb without adding anything to the verb. For example, we ought to go north. It's the modal ought to plus the infinitive, the base form go. They don't have inflections. Modal verbs don't have inflections. It means after the modal verb, you don't add anything to the main verb, especially when you're talking about present or future situation. Like, for example, he shouldn't copy his classmate test, not he shouldn't copies, for example. Even though the subject is he, we don't put to verb copy ies, because with modal verbs that's not possible. Also, modal verbs can be negated or we form the negative by simply putting not to the verb, like can, cannot, may, may not, and so on. There are three main exceptions to the rules, unfortunately for us. Don't be confused, grade 7, because they are easy. We have be able to, which is not actually a modal verb, but it helps verb can to form its other tenses in order to talk about ability. We have to, like for example with he, she, it, you say has to. In the negative present simple, you say don't or doesn't have to. Past simple negative didn't have to. And in the interrogative, again, you use do, does in the present and did in the past. Be allowed to is another form of to express a modal verb, like instead of saying can for permission, you can use be allowed to form other tenses. And definitely we have need also with he, she, it, we put s. With negative don't, doesn't, didn't in the past, and so on. It's like have to. Okay, now if we look closely at this table, as you can see here, the obligation or the necessity, we have must, have to, have got to. The only difference, as you remember, is that must, the person or the speaker takes the decision. Have to, it's external decision. Have got to, it's the same as have to, but we use it in informal English. The negative of must is mustn't. Have to, don't have to, doesn't have to, as I said. Also, we have can't and mustn't. They have the same meaning. The past of must, have to, and have got to is had to. Okay? Now, if you go for advice, we use had better, should, or ought to. In the negative, had better not or shouldn't. And if you are talking about past possibility or criticism, you use should or ought to plus have plus past participle, like you should have left, you ought to have left. For expectation, we use are supposed to or we're supposed to if it's in the past. In case you see it in the tests or something, you don't have it in your tables actually, but just to know it. For suggestions, we have could, might, or we can use shall as well. For no obligation or no necessity, don't need to or don't have to, as you can see clearly in this table. Now, grade 7, we continue to talk about ability. We use can, could, be able to. We use it when we want to speak of skill or actions that are capable of. When you say that what you can do, what you are capable of doing. In the present, you put the verb plus base form. If the past of can is could, and in order to form other tenses, you use be able to. And definitely later on, you can read all the examples on your own. But to make the video shorter for you, I'm not going to read all the examples. But later on, please stop the video and read the examples. For permission, we use can, could, may. Sometimes we use do you mind if, but it's not a modal verb. Remember, can, could, may are the modal verbs. The difference is in the level of formality. Can is friendly, could is polite, may is formal. Okay, for request, we use can, could, will, would, or would you mind? Like, can you close the door? Would you close the door? Could you close the door? Etc. The difference again is in the level of formality. Would and could are polite. Would you mind is very polite. And remember, after would you mind, you can use gerund. It means verb ing. Sometimes they use to plus infinitive, but most of the time it's better to put a verb ing as they mention in the reference in your book. Okay, now for advice, we use should, ought to, or had better. We use these models to give advice to friends or people in general, should and ought to. We can use had better if we are talking about a specific situation. They say here had better is used when giving strong advice. It's the most formal one, and it is often used contracted, like you'd better, or you can simply say you had better. For necessity, when it's something is very important to be done, you can use have to or have got to, don't have to in the negative, must or must not, and can't. Okay, you can read the examples again later on slowly in order to revise the unit. For expectations, we use be supposed to. I'm not gonna waste a lot of time on this slide because you don't have it in your unit, but you can just read it for general information. For possibility, we use may, might, or could, and we use them to express the degree of possibility that something may happen in the future. The three of them are actually pretty similar. They don't have differences in meaning. You can use whichever you like. It won't affect the meaning. Okay, but here if you notice in this green bubble, they say what is the difference between maybe and may plus be. Of course, the first one, though, when it's one word, that's the meaning of perhaps, it's an adverb. But may plus be, this is a modal verb, just to highlight this idea so that you don't get confused. Okay, now again, if you want to make conclusions, or we call them in our book logical assumption, we can use must or can't. They have opposite meanings, like you must be sad, you can't be happy. And also here they say we have to, may, and might, and could if you are not actually very sure with our conclusion. Okay, like they must be mistaken, I didn't steal a coin, that's very sure. He has to be right, he knows everything about it, that's very sure. They might be lost, they have not arrived yet, that's a possibility more than, or a conclusion based on something that you think. So there are a lot of usages for can and could, as you can see. Now, the uses of would, we can use would in many cases for polite request, for polite offer. You can use it as a past tense of will. You can use it as in the second and third type of conditionals. This one, the conditionals you haven't, with the conditionals you haven't studied it with me, guys. So don't worry about it. I lost it. I wanted to show it to you. This one, the conditionals, you are not supposed to know it, so don't worry about it. We also use it for advice, to talk about desire, to talk about opinion or hope, presumption or expectation, wish, uncertainty. Uncertainty means when you're not sure, like in number 8, he would seem to be getting more handsome. Each usage, you have an example next to it. You can read them. One, you have one. Two, you have two in the examples. You can read them for further information. So, is it too much to learn? Yes, modal verbs are a lot actually. Modal verbs can be confusing sometimes, but is it impossible to learn them? Of course not. There are lots of ways. What are the ways? It's by repetition, by revising them, by reading them, by watching some videos about them. And here I am. I have been sending you lots of presentations about it. And of course, feel free to ask me if you still find any difficulty understanding them. No problem. But they are easy if you just decide to do them. The last thing I'm going to say today is this is the correction of the roundup homework that I gave to you last week, pages 90, 91, 92. I gave you 4 exercises. You can check your answers for them. And for next week, please, I just want you to do page 93, exercises 11, 12, 13 in your roundup. And we can always contact each other. Thank you for listening. I hope you understood the lesson. Bye-bye for now.